All right, we're going to go ahead. Well, that's we just prayed for Mike and got a great report. Again, he's still very sick, but that's a significant difference than how he went down there. So we praise the Lord for that. Tonight we talked about the people coming to arrest Jesus. That's where we left off.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out. I thought I marked it.
47.
47, yeah.
Okay, verse 47. Okay, so I didn't get enough pages out of my notes here.
Well,
Let's get the other
it's
one
only
out.
3 lines.
Yeah. So Jesus' betrayal and arrest. So
Judas is coming after him.
yeah, so this is going to go pretty fast as we take off to the end of this very, very, very long chapter. We pointed out the fact that they just kept falling asleep. We pointed out the fact that, just like when they said, I'm not going to betray you. We have this heart's desire, but our flesh is weak. The spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. And that it was the same with Peter. Although he said he would never deny him, it was the same with James and John, who would have been the sons of Zebedee. This is the same group, as we mentioned, that went up on the Mount of Transfiguration with him and got to see that preview of the kingdom. And one of the things that we talked about, I think, before we stopped, was the fact that, Jesus gives us a good example here when we're going through a trial or a temptation. Best thing to do is talk to the Lord. Just talk to the Lord. Ask Him for strength, as you go through difficult times, and He'll strengthen us. He promises He'll strengthen us. He'll be with us. He says, so he prays. We talked about last week, the whole theological thing. He's 100% human, 100% God. That's never happened before, never will happen again. And so some of these things are difficult for us to understand. From his humanity, obviously, he's praying, if there's some other way that this can be accomplished, Lord, that would be great. But the bottom line is, I want your will to be done. So if it is your will that I die in their stead, then that's what I want. And he asked friends. That's another good thing, that we often do, and something that we remember to do is when we're suffering with trials and temptations. I mean, one of the first things Diane did when she found out how bad Mike was to call me, and I started to pray, and we have this wonderful thing called Facebook now, and some people are, attached to it with the hip, some of our people, and that's neither good nor bad. I'm just saying that sometimes I send it out, man, they got it. They immediately have it, and they're responding, and they're praying, and they know. And so here we were praying for Mike, and she was praying for Mike, and we were praying for Mike, and we got a good result. We're grateful that the Lord has responded, and He's doing much, much better here. So that's what we see here. And then at the end of that paragraph, right before we stop, it says, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays is at hand." So Judas has come with a group of people, and so that's where we begin. Jesus' betrayal and arrest. It says, while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and the elders of the people. So the chief priests and the elders, they're not doing their own bidding. they're sending, they have rabble rousers that go do this kind of stuff. And so they've sent these guys with swords and clubs to follow Judas. And it says, now he was betraying him. He who was betraying him gave him a sign saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him. So this is what he told this group of rabble rousers that are there to arrest Jesus. Immediately Judas went to Jesus and said, Hail, Rabbi, and kissed him. I mean, that is a dirty, rotten thing to do, isn't it? I mean, how much lower could you get? Somebody like Jesus that had chosen Judas, and of course, I think it's John or Luke, one that says that he knew he chose a devil. So he knew he chose one that would not be saved and was not really a convert, but it was so that God's plan would be carried out, right? And so this man that he had invested 3 years in, they had entrusted the purse to. You wonder how many times they thought, I thought we had more money than that. How many times they had questioned him, or and Jesus said to him, friend, do what you have come for. So Jesus knows what's going on. He had already said that he knew the one that would betray him, right? At the Passover meal. And then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. So laid hands on there is not like we talked about Sunday. It's not an ordination service or a commending service or a setting apart. It's they put their hands on him to grab him and to take him to these kangaroo courts that he's going to end up going into. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And of course, I put up there John, I don't know if you can read it, John 18:10. John actually recorded that was Peter that did that. So again, you criticize Peter a lot, but when you look carefully, Peter, he was ready to go. He was ready to fight. None of the rest of them, as it say, took that kind of action. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword away, or sword back, into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. I don't think that is... I think that is a proverb type thing. It's a general truth. I don't think he's specifically saying just in this case. But generally, people who live by violence, they end up dying by violence. You think about organized crime. How many people involved in organized crime end up getting killed by somebody that was involved in organized crime, that they were working for, or they were the boss. We watched a movie the other night about a drug cartel, and the guy that was over it, in the end, the guy that was kind of his main guy in command, he waited till he wasn't watching, shot him in the back, and took over his whole business, I mean, that's the heart of those people. So if you live in that rough crowd like that, you probably will not make it to die of a normal death. It's just a part of you try to live by violence, and violence is going to end up taking you down. And so then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Now, this doesn't mean that Jesus was a pacifist. You think about the broader context of the Bible. Remember, Jesus is God. He's in his essence, he's God, like the Father and the Spirit. Think of all the times when God told Israel to go and wipe out nations. God's not a pacifist. God's holy and God's righteous, and when justice has to be carried out, God has no problem with using righteous men, or sometimes unrighteous men, as he used Assyria and Babylonia and others to carry out killing with the sword, death in battle, that type of thing, carrying out justice. So don't think this is saying that he's a pacifist. He is not. He just simply, right now, this is God's plan. This is God's plan for Jesus to die. And so he says, or do you not think that I can appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? I mean, you think about all the things that we've seen Jesus do. And many of these apostles saw maybe not all of that, but most of that. If Jesus can, think of what he did. He can heal somebody. He can stop a storm, on the water. He can create water from wine. All those types of things. He can heal lepers that man could not heal. He could help a guy with a shriveled hand, his hand become totally healthy. He raised several people from the dead. The widow of Nain, remember, her son had died and was really dead. Lazarus, really dead. Remember, he said, no, I don't mean he's asleep. Not that kind of asleep. He's dead. So if this is the Father's plan, and God the Son has the power to do all of that, then he doesn't need swords to save him at this point, is his point. And they should get that. They should understand that. At the same time, I would probably do the same thing. In the fear of man, in a tense situation like that, I could easily react in the same way. So I'm not saying anything negative about Peter's spirituality at this point. But Jesus could call down angels. Remember, Satan knew this. Remember? Satan said, and he quoted, I forget what psalm it is. He quoted the Psalms when he said, you get up on the pinnacle of the temple and dive off. Because, and he quoted a psalm that said, he'll put his angels in charge over you. Remember?
Right.
And so nothing's going to be able to hurt Jesus unless it is part of God's plan and purpose. I believe the same thing for us. I believe he puts that kind of protection on us, and nothing will occur with us until it is time for God to take us home. And so we have that security as well. So how then will the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way? So this is the way God has planned it, and this is the way it's going to happen. This is the way it's going to happen. That's why I'm not calling legions of angels down.
It's been predicted.
Yes.
All through the Old Testament.
Absolutely. From Genesis 3:15, the first promise, all the way through. So this has been coming for a long time, 4,000 years. At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. So he's confronting them with the reality of the situation. Listen, this is you guys are trying to do this and arrest me, knowing that I've never tried to hurt anybody. Why are you doing this? But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets, he says. And that's what David said. Remember, it's plural here, and he doesn't quote us a particular verse here. It's plural. He's talking about all those prophecies. And remember, Abraham's called a prophet. Moses is called a prophet. We really think of the coming of the prophets when Samuel showed up. He's kind of the first prophet in that line of prophets when the kings came along. And after that, we see a lot of prophets and prophecies, right? After Samuel, you have all of the prophecies. You have Isaiah and Amos and Joel and all those prophecies after that. But also Moses was a prophet and Abraham's called a prophet. So there were prophecies all through there. And Jesus says, this is the culmination. This is all of those prophecies about me. They're being fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and fled. What happened to that?
Yeah.
What happened to what they just told him over there in the upper room?
Yeah.
We're not going to betray you, Lord. We'll be with you. Nobody's gonna mess with you. We're going to be there.
Well,
Peter
he's
came
already stopped Peter, so
Yeah, that's true.
They all got the idea that he knows that this is what's going to happen, and
Yeah.
we better back off. So
Yes.
that's probably an idea about it anyway.
So they left him and they fled. Now, before we start talking about Matthew's accounts of the kangaroo courts, let's turn back to that last page that I gave you, page 7. And I want to read this about Jesus' trials. One of the benefits of having a Bible, a harmony of the Gospels, what theologians call and Bible teachers call a harmony of the Gospels. And there are many out there. I think the NASB has one. I've got one of the old original ones was by A.T. Robertson, who was a Greek scholar, and it's in the King James. But a lot of the versions have done, and obviously what they've tried to do is they've tried to study the chronology. They've looked at accounts that seem to be similar to see if they're just similar accounts or the same account, and they try to line everything up. Some of you may have seen those and read them. And so this little summary here by Tom Constable helps us put all of these different court appearances, if you will, together to understand what Jesus went through. Matthew stressed Jesus' righteousness for his readers by highlighting the injustice of his trials. The breaches in law are so numerous as to be unbelievable. Even the ordinary legal rules were disregarded in the following particulars. So these guys are not interested. Remember who the Sanhedrin is. The Sanhedrin is made up of, actually at this time, I read that the Sanhedrin was made up mostly of Sadducees. There may have been a few, I think there were a few Pharisees, but mostly Sadducees. And those are the liberal guys that didn't believe in resurrection and that type of thing. So, but there were chief priests, there were scribes, there were Sadducees. They all made up what they call the Sanhedrin, or the Supreme Court, basically. And remember, when Rome took over a country, they allowed them a certain level of, a certain degree of self-governance. And that's what's going on here. So the Sanhedrin is like the Supreme Court. And so they have, and of course, if you compare it to our present Supreme Court, our present Supreme Court, what they do is what they're supposed to do is look at our Constitution and see if something that has been brought before them, of course they filter it all out and see if they have standing and all of that, but if they accept a case, they're supposed to look at that case as compared to the Constitution of the United States to see if it violates the Constitution or not, right? Okay, so let's step back into the first century. In the first century, you have the Sanhedrin, which was their Supreme Court, and their constitution, if you will, was the Mosaic Law. So they had to compare it to the Mosaic Law, and probably, I'm not an authority in this area in New Testament, probably some of those traditions, the elders, that they had probably added some stuff, would be my suspicion, but I don't know. So the writer here that Constable is quoting from, and I didn't write it down, I don't know if this is another theologian, I don't know if this is Josephus, who was a Jewish historian that lived in that day, or who it was saying this. But he writes, the breaches in the law are so numerous as to be unbelievable. Even the ordinary legal rules were disregarded in the following particulars. The examination by Annas was without witnesses. No, you can't do that. You can't examine somebody without witnesses. B, remember, you have to, later they look for witnesses. They try to trump up witnesses, and they bring them in and they contradict each other, so which disqualifies them as a valid witness in a court. So before Annas, they didn't have any witnesses, which was illegal. B, the trial by night. It was illegal to have a trial at night. There were court hours, and you could only have a court case during those court hours. C, the sentence on the first day of trial. Apparently there was a period of time for a court proceeding, and you had to give, I guess, the defense and everybody, the prosecution and everybody, a certain number of days before that decision was made. D, the trial of a capital charge on the day before the Sabbath. So that violated Jewish law. E, the suborning of witnesses. I'm not sure what that word means. My guess is the coaching of witnesses is maybe. Do y'all know that word? Does anybody know that word? Why don't you look it up, David?
No, my Google's not working.
Oh, you probably don't have any. I know that they coached witnesses in this, so that's probably what they're talking about. And lastly, the direct interrogation by the high priest. That was a no-no. So all of these things that they did in Jesus's court case violated Jewish law, Jewish jurisprudence. All right. It might be helpful to take a brief overview of Jesus's trials, since none of the gospel evangelists give the complete picture. So, in the inspiration of the Spirit of God, the focus that God had for that gospel writer, they presented certain aspects for certain readers, but nobody put it all together, which is surprising because Luke, that was kind of his forte, to put it all together, but he didn't.
My Google did work.
Okay.
Suborn is a bribe or otherwise induce someone to commit an unlawful act such as perjury.
Okay. So paying them to say certain things. All right, so all of that happened. It may be helpful to take a brief overview of Jesus' trials, since none of the gospel evangelists give the complete picture. There were essentially two trials, one Jewish and one Roman. The Jewish trial began with Annas and formally examined Jesus late Thursday night. During this examination, members of the Sanhedrin were evidently assembling. His accusers then brought Jesus before Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, who decided he was guilty of blasphemy. So according to the Jewish law, obviously claiming to be the Son of God was blasphemy. But that's only blasphemy if you're not the Son of God. If you are, which he was and had given all evidence that he was, then it's not blasphemy. So he is accused of blasphemy, but he didn't commit a blasphemy. All right. At sunrise on Friday, the Sanhedrin decided to send Jesus to Pilate for trial. The Roman trial began with Jesus appearing before Pilate. Pilate then sent Jesus to Herod for interrogation. Finally, Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. Remember Herod was and I forget what Herod was that. It wasn't Antipas, maybe it was Antipas.
He was over Pilate, though.
Yes.
Herod was over Pilate, I think.
Yeah. He was, yeah.
The king or something.
Remember, Herod the Great is the one that was around when Jesus was born. And he had 4 sons.
Oh.
And that's why the Bible talks about a tetrarch. Because when Herod the Great died, they split it up and gave it to his 4 sons. And I believe it was Herod Antipas that was over Perea and over in that area. And he could have been over Judah. It's not coming to me. Remember, he's the one that had John the Baptist killed, that his head chopped off. So Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate for a second examination. The trials were over, and Jesus was at Golgotha at mid-morning, about 9 a.m. Remember, Pilate didn't find him guilty either. In fact, Pilate wrote above him exactly what Jesus said. I am the king. I'm the Jewish king. And he was. That's what the Messiah is, the Jewish king. Who will come and rule.
3 different languages, wasn't it?
Yes. Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. I don't think it was in Hebrew. I think it was
They
in
didn't like that.
Because Aramaic was, no, they didn't like that because that, right up above him, it said exactly what they condemned him for. They said, you're committing blasphemy because you're saying you're the Son of God, which would have been the king. And remember, he told Pilate, he said, I am a king, but I'm not a king here. I'm not a king over the world. So it was over by mid-morning, about 9 a.m., when Jesus went to Golgotha. All right, so that's putting all the trials together. Matthew deals with some of them. All right, so those who seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest. And who's he living out here, according to the chronology we just did? He's not mentioning Annas. They took him before Annas with no witnesses, which was illegal. And I believe the Annas one was at night. So that's where they violated that law. Those who seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes, who were the teachers of the law, and the elders, who were the people that represented, the guys that represented the people, were gathered together. But Peter was following him at a distance as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and entered in and sat down with the officers to see the outcome. And remember, what we just read, all of the apostles fled. But Peter didn't. Peter cut that guy's ear off, and of course Jesus healed it, we know. And then Peter followed him at a distance. To me, that's much more bravery than what the other one showed.
What was the story of the guy that had the sheet on? They tried to grab him, and the sheet fell off. And he went off.
Most theologians believe that was Mark,
Mark.
because Mark is the one that recorded it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I've read, and I remember we studied Mark here inductively, and Jack was here that night, and Jack had done some research on that, and he said which makes sense. A lot of these writers, when it's them, like John, that was a cultural thing. Remember, John would talk about the apostle that Jesus loved, which was him, but he never said.
But you never said it.
He never said it. So that was a common thing that they didn't use. I guess it was maybe looked at as prideful or something. So, okay. So he sat down with the officers to see the outcome. Now, again, to me, that's bravery. Because he knows a lot of these people have seen him with Jesus. And he's still there. Now, the chief priests, who were the legal experts, and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death. So this is when they were paying people to, bribing people to come in and say this, that, or the other, telling them what to say, you know. But they couldn't get it together. They did not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. So if they're false witnesses, that means they didn't know what they were saying. They had just been paid. But later on, two came forward and said, "This man stated, I am able to destroy the temple of God, to rebuild it in 3 days." The high priest stood up and said to him, "Do you not answer? Why is this that these men are what is this that these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." So I've not done a lot of research on this, but I know that apparently when the high priest would say that to somebody, they had to answer. I don't know if that was, I don't remember that in the Mosaic Law, but it could be. It may have been something they developed later. Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself." What did he say himself? That he is the Christ, the Son of God. You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see, and this is significant. We've talked about these verses many times, especially Daniel 7:13 through 14, but we've also seen Psalm 110:1. In fact, I did a whole message on Psalm 110 this summer as we went through the Psalms, right? Which is a messianic psalm. You have said to yourself, nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power. That is Psalm 110:1. And coming on the clouds of heaven. That is Daniel 7:13 and 14. That is the Son of Man coming to take the kingdom, to establish the kingdom. That's what Daniel 7 teaches. You'll remember the passage, the Ancient of Days, that's the Father, the Ancient of Days, and the Son of Man comes in the clouds, and the Father turns the kingdom over to the Son. So that's what's going on there. So that's why they knew when Jesus used the name Son of Man, they knew what he was talking about. So they've just asked him, "Are you the Christ?" Remember, when you see Christ, think Messiah, because that's what Hebrew is. Hebrew is Mashiach. So, are you the Messiah, they're saying? The Son of God? And he said, "You have said it yourself, that that's who I am. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And of course, that's two things there. Seeing him sitting on the right hand of God, that's the position he took up when he ascended, remember? He ascended to heaven, he sat down at the right hand of God. In fact, God says in Psalm 110, you sit at my right hand until I make them a footstool for your feet. I think that's 110. That's either Psalm 2 or Psalm 110. I'm getting my Psalms mixed up now. But anyway, that's what he's telling them. You've said who I am. That's exactly who I am. And I'm going to go sit by my Father's at my Father's right hand, which is the position of power that sons of kings had. And he said, not only will you see that, but you will also see me coming on the clouds of heaven, and that is Daniel 7. So they knew their theology. They knew what he was saying. So what did the high priest do? Then the high priest tore his robes and he said, "He has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses?" So if he said that and he's not that, then that is the death penalty. And of course they don't believe he's the Son of God, so they're going to give him the death penalty. But they can't, right? That's one of the restrictions that the Romans had on them. They couldn't administer the death penalty for religious sin, apparently. And so the Romans would carry out the sentence. All right. "Behold, you have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Leviticus 24:16. Let's turn back and read that.
After I've lost you somewhere.
Uh-oh. We're in verse 65, 66.
65, verse 65.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go back to Leviticus here.
Yeah, okay.
Leviticus 24:16. If I can get back there in time here. 24:16 says, "Moreover, the one who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him, the alien as well as the native. When he blasphemes the name, shall he be put to death." So it was the death penalty. Of course, they can't carry out the death penalty for this kind of sin, apparently, because they certainly carry it out on Stephen later, not too long down the road here, if you remember. So then they spat in his face and they beat him with their fists. Others slapped him and they said, "Prophesy to us, you Christ, you Messiah, who is the one who hit you." And of course, Isaiah 53:7 is being fulfilled here.
Right.
I just want to read that.
What is it?
Isaiah
53:7. "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth." All right. We're still not going to finish, are we? We still got another. I think this is going to be a record chapter, but I'm going to defend myself by saying that this is the longest chapter in the book of Matthew. So we're at. We'll start at Peter's denial. We'll talk about Peter's denial, and so we've got about another page and a half to finish up this chapter next time. All right?
When we were talking on page 7,
Yes, sir.
and it said they came in and denied, they asked Peter the third time, they said, "Your voice, your talk
Yeah.
gave you away."
Yeah. Your
And
accent.
then Peter started to curse him.
Yes.
And when I read that, I know from experience that when I became a Christian, when I went back to the barracks, the guys looked at me and said, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been to church." And they said, "Well, what happened to you at church?" I said, "I don't know." But I said, "I just listened to my Lord being crucified." And they said, "Your language has changed."
Praise the Lord.
God took the cursing that I used to do was gone. And I didn't even realize it. The men that I came in front of when I came back to the barracks realized it when I came in the building.
Wow, that's amazing. So here, what Peter's doing is he's trying to blend back in with the unbelievers.
Right.
I mean,
He's trying to make-
that's basically what he so it doesn't he get in trouble, you know. All right. Well, Charles